Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you this evening. You know, the founders, or the framers, regarded private property as sacred as life and liberty. The right to own and control private property is an inalienable right, and it was protected by the Constitution. But Washington lawmakers and bureaucrats, environmentalists, and the United Nations have been plotting to abolish private property, take control of the economy, control education, and control and reduce population. They're doing this in a package, a global plan that they call sustainable development. And I'm here tonight to share with you 8 months of my research, learning about the history of sustainable development, and I'll connect the dots to its implementation at the local level. The concept of sustainable development arose after the 1974 United Nations adoption of a declaration for the establishment of a new international economic order. The document was written by developing countries and called for the regulation of multinational corporations, the authority to nationalize foreign property, the authority to establish commodity monopolies, and the transfer of technology and technical assistance. The document showed clearly that the delegates to the UN General Assembly accepted the idea that governments should virtually control the economy and that equity was the primary objective. This document was largely ignored by developed nations, but many of these UN delegates took these ideas to other UN conferences. For example, the 1976 UN Conference on Human Settlements, or Habitat I. Here is an excerpt from the preamble. Land cannot be treated as an ordinary asset, controlled by individuals and subject to the pressures and inefficiencies of the market. Private land ownership is also the principal instrument of accumulation and concentration of wealth, and therefore contributes to social injustice. This preamble sets the stage for 65 pages of very specific land use recommendations. Among the many recommendations are to redistribute population in accord with resources. Government must control the use of land to achieve equitable distribution of resources. Control land use through zoning and land use planning. Excessive profits from land use must be recaptured by government. Public ownership of land should be used to exercise urban and rural land reform. And owner rights should be separated from development rights, which should be held by public authority. This established the direction for the UN's recommendation. The term sustainable development entered the vocabulary during the 1990s and has virtually permeated every facet of American life. The term was first defined in the United Nations 1987 report of the World Commission on Environment and Development called Our Common Future. The commission was chaired by Gro Harlem Brundtland, who was also the vice chair of the World Socialist Party. Our Common Future defines sustainable development to be development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. Sustainable development is illustrated to depict the proper balance between social equity, the environment, and economic development. What is called sustainable is the perfect balance between policies related to these three all-encompassing areas of life. Sustainable development policies dictate that environmental protection can only be achieved by making nature the central organizing principle for our economy and society. As such, every societal decision would first be questioned as to how it might affect the environment. To achieve this, policy focuses on three components: land use, education, and population control and reduction. Sustainable development policy dictates that in order for social equity to be achieved, individuals must give up their selfish wants for the needs of the common good or the community. How does this differ from communism? The authors of sustainable development policies believe that private property is an evil that creates wealth for a few at the expense of the poor. So too is business ownership. Instead, every worker or person will be a direct capital owner. Property and businesses are to be kept in the name of the owner, keeping them responsible for taxes and other expenses. However, control is to be in the hands of the community. This policy is right out of the Socialist Handbook. Sustainable development's economic policy is based on the overriding premise that the wealth of the world was made at the expense of the poor. It dictates that if the conditions of the poor are to be improved, wealth must first be taken from the rich. Consequently, sustainable development's economic policy is based not on private enterprise, but on public-private partnerships. When the private business enters into the partnership with government, it is government who will establish the policy for business. The United Nations General Assembly asked the 1992 World Commission on Environment and Development, also called the Brundtland Commission, to propose long-term strategies for achieving sustainable development by the year 2000 and beyond. 5 years later, the plan called Agenda 21 was unveiled at the 1992 Conference on Environment and Development. 178 nations signed on, and George H.W. Bush was the signatory for the United States. The conference was chaired by Maurice Strong, who was also a member of the Brundtland Commission. In its 40 chapters, Agenda 21 addresses virtually every aspect of life. Each chapter presents many policy recommendations that member nations are expected to adopt. Some of the more important chapters are demographics and sustainability, human settlements, which is the foundation for sustainable communities, planning and management of land, management of water, the role of business and industry, and international mechanisms and institutions. These are seen to be the coordinators of worldwide sustainable development. Agenda 21 is a soft law, not a treaty, so it required no action by Congress. But in 1993, President Bill Clinton signed the Biodiversity Treaty, which called for the implementation of Agenda 21. The plan calls for the creation of national strategies, plans, policies, and processes which are crucial in achieving a sustainable world. The ratification of the Biodiversity Treaty, calling for the implementation of Agenda 21, was never voted on by Senate after Dr. Michael Kaufman presented this map to the U.S. Senate of the proposed development of the wildlands under Agenda 21 in the United States. The areas you see in red represents wilderness reserves and corridors known as the wildlands. This would be off limits to human beings. Areas in yellow represents highly regulated buffer zones, where human existence will be greatly restricted. The The areas in green represent zones for normal use, where future growth would only be allowed within boundaries of high-density, mixed-use urban development areas. Six months after his inauguration, President Bill Clinton issued Executive Order 12852, which created the President's Council on Sustainable Development on June 29, 1993. The Council's membership included 12 cabinet-level federal officials, Jonathan Lash, President of Rural Resources Institute, John Adams, the Executive Director of National Resources Defense Council, Diane Dillon Ridgely, President of Zero Population, Michelle Perrault, International Vice President of Sierra Club, John C. Sawhill, the President of the Nature Conservancy, J.D. Hare, President of the World Conservation Union, Kenneth L. Lay, CEO of Enron Corporation, and William D. Ruckelshaw, Chairman of Browning Ferris Industries and former EPA Administrator. The purpose of the President's Council on Sustainable Development was to translate the recommendations set forth in Agenda 21 into public policy administered by the federal government, and they created the first version of Agenda 21 called Sustainable America. An early achievement of the Council was the development of 16 We Believe statements, among which is statement number 8. We need a collaborative decision process that leads to better decisions, more rapid change, and more sensible use of human, natural, and financial resources in achieving our goals. This new collaborative process is called the consensus process. The consensus process is the most important dimension to the implementation of Agenda 21. Using the consensus process, stakeholders from the affected group selects an initiator who carefully selects members of the affected group to participate in a decision-making committee, often called a steering committee. The policy decisions are predetermined by the facilitator, not by the committee, who never votes. Consensus is the process by which objections to the proposal are extinguished. This is contrary to the democratic process in which the affected group elects representatives who debate and then vote. The affected group then abides by the decisions, but if the affected group is dissatisfied with the decision, they can elect new representatives to reflect their wishes. In this process, the affected group has no voice in choosing the decision makers and in the outcome. The PCSD's first major publication was Sustainable America, A New Consensus. It contained more than 150 policy recommendations taken directly from Agenda 21. After the recommendations had been developed, then Secretary of Department of Commerce, Ron Brown, said that his agency could implement 67% of the recommendations administratively using rulemaking authority. Other department secretaries reported similar numbers. The recommendations made by the PCSD covered a wide range of public policies. Among the most important are land use policies. Sustainable America says, private land use decisions are often driven by strong economic incentives that result in several ecological or aesthetic consequences. The key to overcoming it is through public policies. The 1990s saw an expansion of government control of land use. By 1997, the federal government already owned 1/3 of all the land in America. State and local governments owned another 10%. The federal government went on to expand 21 national monuments, designated 43 million acres of roadless areas, appropriated millions in grants to states and local governments, and set up land trusts for the purpose of acquiring more private property. These activities were promoted by the land management agencies, all members of the PCSD. To implement their plan, millions in grants were awarded to the American Planning Association, who would prepare recommended state legislation and local ordinances to carry out the plan. The EPA and other agencies issued millions more in challenge grants to local governments and organizations for visioning projects. During the 1990s, there emerged a rash of visioning projects in counties, cities, and towns across the nation. They were all the result of the PCSD, funded by grants by an agency of the government who was a member of the PCSD. The EPA, for example, would issue challenge grants for visioning projects to NGOs and to local governments. The grant recipient would designate an initiator who would select the Visioning Council, often called a steering committee. Those selected are generally business leaders in the community that in many cases stand to gain financially from the implementation of the goals. To spread this process across the country, the EPA coordinated a smart growth network consisting of dozens of non-government organizations. Among them was the American Planning Association, the Conservation Fund, the National Resources Defense Council, and the Sierra Club. All of these organizations have promoted government control of land use since 1976 UN Conference. In each of the communities where visioning councils were established, their starting proposal was the recommendations of the PCSD. Their objective was to present PCSD's recommendations as local goals for the community. Through the consensus process, remove any objections that might arise. Develop specific recommendations to achieve the goals. And the result is the vision and a new comprehensive plan of action. This process takes typically 12 to 18 months, during which the local initiator begins to issue press releases and to involve local media to introduce the idea of building a sustainable community. The idea is to build so much public support for the sustainable community as defined by the Comprehensive Plan of Action that elected officials will have no choice but to rubber stamp it. Local government officials generally have no idea that the goals for the community came from the United Nations Global Plan, Agenda 21. Partners for sustainable development include ICLEI, the International Council for Local Environmental Initiatives. They now call themselves Local Governments for Sustainability. ICLEI provides technical consulting, training, and information services to assist local governments with the implementation of sustainable development. Their basic premise is that locally designed initiatives can provide an effective way to achieve local, national, and global sustainability objectives. There are 609 counties and cities who are dues-paying members of ICLEI in the United States. 18 of those members are here in Virginia. The ICMA is the International County City Management Association. ICMA provides technical and management assistance, training, and information resources in the areas of performance measurement for the local government community. The American Planning Association is one of the many members of the PCSD. They partner with ICLEI and ICMA in the implementation of sustainable development. They developed the tools available to localities to facilitate the implementation of sustainable development policies. The The Renaissance Planning Group is an urban planning firm. They played a critical role in Florida's Forever program. The Forever program is Florida's premier conservation and recreation lands acquisition program. Florida Forever is the largest public land acquisition program of its kind in the United States. Approximately 9.8 million acres of conservation land was purchased under the Florida Forever program. The Virginia Municipal League is an association of city, town, and county governments. They are partnered with ICLEI and other organizations to develop the Go Green Virginia initiative to accelerate the implementation of sustainable development policies. They have also worked with the Renaissance Planning Group. All of these organizations are on a mission to transform local governance using rulemaking authority to create a new form of governance by unelected authority. Each mandate, policy, and agenda is based on the principle that the collective good is more important than individuals' rights. This is in direct opposition to the principles set forth in the Declaration of Independence. In 2007, the Virginia State Legislature passed land use provisions in HB 3202 that mandated that counties with a prescribed growth rate establish high-density urban development areas. Currently, there are 67 high-growth localities required to establish urban development areas. The localities must allow for compact densities of at least 4 units per acre, but many localities are calling for densities up to 18 units per acre. They must incorporate the new urbanism design principles, such as interconnected road networks, pedestrian accommodations, and bike paths. In June of 2008, an organization called the One Planet Communities was invited to a conference of the Virginia Sustainable Building Network to give a presentation of their proposed One Planet Communities ideas. This is one of the slides from that presentation. Note the proposals made include 58% less electricity, 23 gallons less water, and that's per person, per household. Vehicle mileage time down 65%, 50% reduction in car ownership, and 40 electric car solar-powered charging stations. Now, when I went to CPAC, I was amazed to see they already have car sharing in DC, and they're electric cars. Here, One Planet Communities calls for a reduction in the footprint of 6 homes to less than 2 by the year 2020. In other words, they propose we be stacked on top of one another in high-rise housing to avoid further expansion of development. The 5-minute lifestyle proposes that you work, shop, go to school, enjoy forms of recreation and entertainment, all within your sustainable community, and all within a 5-minute walk or bike ride of your home. Here is One Planet Communities' proposal for sustainable transportation. They propose travel by bicycle or on foot within your community, electric car sharing to travel short distances from one community to another, and high-speed rail for longer distances. Car ownership would eventually be a thing of the past. Colleges and universities across the nation are teaching and promoting sustainable development principles. Sustainability programs have also entered the K-12 public school system. There was a recent survey of 12 of the 134 school districts in Virginia as part of a case study to assess the progress of the implementation of sustainability programs in Virginia's K-12 schools. The goal is to ensure that our children, the leaders of the future, are well indoctrinated in sustainability practices. Here are some of the questions asked in the survey. Do you incorporate sustainability into academic programs and curricula? Do you have any gardens that are used for teaching purposes? Do your students participate in school energy audit programs? And has your school system received federal, state, or local recognition for energy efficiency or sustainability programs? The policies in Agenda 21 call for government control over water. In May of 2009, President Obama issued Executive Order 13508, giving full control of the Chesapeake Bay protection and restoration to the EPA. The Environmental Protection Agency was charged with the responsibility of establishing regulations, programs, and policies to restore water quality, establish best agricultural conservation practices, strengthen stormwater management practices for land, assess the impacts of climate change on the Bay and develop strategies, develop focused and coordinated habitat. Let's take a look at what the EPA considers to be some of the best agricultural conservation practices. Thanks to all the pressure of the EPA, the pressure they put on Congress, one of America's premier agricultural regions suffered the worst man-made drought in the history of the United States. Since March of 2008, thousands of farms in the San Joaquin Valley have been without water to irrigate their crops to protect the 3-inch Delta smelt. The redirection of water away from the richest soil in the country turned San Joaquin Valley into a dust bowl and put more than 40,000 farmers out of work. Many thousands of farmers became dependent on public assistance, food pantries, and unemployment to survive. Many hundreds of farmers were forced to take conservation easement relief to save the land, transferring the tax burden to the remaining taxpayers in the community and the state. Conservation easement is one of many government schemes to ensure that government will have total control over the future use of rural land. The EPA clearly feels it was more important to protect this 3-inch fish, called the Delta smelt, than to keep the nation's richest farms from the business of providing much of our nation's food supply. The consequence of this action sharply weakened the supply of produce across the nation, resulting in higher prices at the market. In short, the global to local plan is to take the policies of the United Nations Agenda 21 brought to the United States and translated into policy for sustainable America to establish the policy for your community's comprehensive plan of action. Rest assured that your community's comprehensive plan will have a negative impact on private property rights, economic prosperity, and will result in a regulatory taking of land. Sustainable development policies will result in a sharp increase in the cost of housing in urban areas. Revitalization plans and the establishment of high-density urban areas displaces many through gentrification and artificially creates a land shortage, which always results in sharp increases in the cost of housing. Regulations that will lead to the rationing of water, electricity, and fuel. Every comprehensive plan includes regulations to audit and restrict the consumption of individual use of resources. These new regulations are a requirement to receive federal funding made available for sustainable projects. Such restrictions will force the expensive retrofitting of a home in order to meet one's daily need for water, electricity, and fuel. Many who cannot afford the expensive upgrades will be forced to leave their home and the community. Higher property tax is another consequence of high-density urban areas. Rezoning for higher density development in urban areas artificially inflates property values, thus increases property taxes. A decrease or total loss in value of property in rural areas. Land in rural areas and outside the new growth boundaries will lose some, if not all, of its value. For example, if you purchased a 5-acre parcel of land that was not yet developed in an area that calls for 25 or more acres to build one home under the new zoning plan, you would be denied a building permit, thus your land would be deemed worthless. In short, sustainable development policies can and will ultimately lead to a regulatory taking of land that transfers private owner control to government owner control. Sustainable development policies are designed to abolish private property and control every aspect of our lives through the transformation of our system of equal justice to one of social justice under the guise of protecting the environment and preventing urban sprawl, rural sprawl. This kind of central planning is defined as socialism. If it hasn't come to your town, it will. Thank you. Sorry, I was told I could have a question and answer period.
I have a comment.
Didn't realize that. I thought we were...
I want to thank you for coming here tonight, this evening, and bringing all this information to our attention.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. And we have some little booklets that are being passed out. Let me tell you, first of all, one of the questions that is always asked of me is how do we combat this at the local level? Now, one of the things we have to do is work with our legislators for those who are willing to work with us, to stop the passage of a lot of these very egregious land use pieces of legislation, land use laws. Conservation easement relief it can be a very wonderful thing. But just remember, when you have and it's fine, when you have to do it to save your farm, but when there are strict regulations that force you by regulation to have to save your farm by taking conservation easement relief, then we have to look to government to fix that. And also be mindful of the fact that when government offers you a way to get tax relief by preserving some of your land into perpetuity, remember that every tax break that you get transfers a tax burden to someone else. This is a redistribution of wealth. And we need to be very mindful of the consequences of some of the relief that we take for ourselves and how it impacts others in our community. Every incentive, every subsidy that is offered by government to implement these socialist plans are on the backs of the taxpayer. My county paid $900,000 for their visioning project and a comprehensive plan to the Renaissance Planning Group that has 150 action items that are nothing but a socialist land grab of property and of your rights to use your property as you wish. And if it's fully implemented, the language is so vague, they can come in with regulations and ordinances to put that action plan into motion. And it has the potential of cap and trade. So this is something we need to be mindful of. Now, there's no silver bullet here. And there are some counties where we're fortunate enough to have local government officials that have come to understand this. And they're not accepting these plans at the local level. So legislators, just want to let you know, you may have some localities that are not going to establish urban development areas. We have a gentleman coming down, Richard Rothschild, on April the 6th to speak to a group. It's in Richmond at the Crown Plaza Hotel downtown. The event starts at 6:30, ends at 9. You all are invited. It's free, open to the public. You are given a parking voucher for anyone who attends. If anyone wants to stay overnight, we have hotel rates for $79. Richard Rothschild ran in Carroll County, Maryland on this issue and won his seat as commissioner.
Yes.
His first order of business was to reduce the cost of government, the size of local government, and the cost of local government by nearly $500,000. His second order of business was to kick Ickley out. And his third order of business was to get rid of every sustainability plan in the county. He will be there to speak about what he's done in his community and how he's going about dealing with it with the state and federal government. One thing, he is not taking state and federal money any longer. He is looking for a way, even if it means that they have to exist on a shoestring budget, providing only essential systems in government until they can bring some common sense to the state and federal government. Yes, I have a question back here.
It's a little off track, but I'd like for you to explain what do you get out of this, and how do you fund yourself? How do you get funding?
Well, I was starting to talk about this. We've started an outreach project. Someone has some little booklets that they're going to be passing out. I wrote the little booklet. It gives lots of information, something you can take home with you. It has some websites in there, resources of the materials you saw this evening. So we should have enough for everyone to take one with them. We are also producing DVDs. I travel around the state. I make 3 to 4 presentations a week. And I have been doing this now for 6 months. I am a volunteer, the executive director of Virginia Campaign for Liberty. I don't make a dime, and my contribution is to drive my car, spend money to put gas in my car, and that's my contribution. I am working to set up workshops with local communities all over the state. I think we're pretty close. I think I have 12 more presentations to make, and I think we'll pretty well have saturated the state. And then I'll start again making rounds, and we'll be setting up workshops to help people learn how to fight this at the local level. It will cost us a great deal of money for these outreach programs. Not only are we doing workshops for all of you, but we're doing workshops for local governments to learn how to use coordination to fight back against local and state government. We have some coordination experts who are coming here and training those communities who are interested in coordination. We will also be working to educate more of our legislators. And it does cost money to print these materials. I have in the back on, I believe it's the table for the Constitution Party, back here in the back corner, there are some cards and envelopes. If you would like to contribute to help us with this outreach program, we would very, very much appreciate it. We depend on your contributions to continue to do what I'm doing tonight, and that is to teach people about the truth of what is going on in our communities. And now I'll start taking your questions. I'm sorry.